Chapter 121, Vakert. It didn't take Callie long to set everything up. She moved with the efficiency of a professional assassin, except instead of wielding a dagger, she wielded connections and paperwork. The broker she found for me was as meticulous as he was discreet, which suited my purposes perfectly. I handed the reins of my money over to Callie with a surprising amount of trust, though the mana oath certainly helped. Betrayal wasn't an option for her, not without severe consequences. With $3 billion now safely in hand, I was ready to proceed. Vakert, of course, wasn't going to accept my money without some pomp and ceremony. They insisted on consultations, evaluations, and a tour of their facilities before I could formally commit. All of it was complimentary, naturally. For a deal involving tens of billions, the cost of wining and dining potential clients was a drop in the ocean. So, during the long weekend, Rose and I made our way to Avalon City. After a warp gate transfer, we stepped into a sleek, private plane bearing the Vakert insignia, a glowing skull that would have made any ordinary citizen think twice about boarding. "Do you offer this kind of premium service to all your clients?" I asked Rose as I settled into the plush leather seat. The cabin exuded understated luxury, from the mahogany trim to the silent hum of mana-powered engines. "Only to the ones spending a small fortune," she replied with a smile. "And, well, since you're my friend, you get the VIP treatment. Friends get perks." "Noted." I smirked, leaning back. "I suppose a few thousand on travel expenses is negligible when compared to the tens of billions I'm about to spend?" "Exactly." Rose gave a small shrug, as if the scale of this transaction were as mundane as grocery shopping. By the time we arrived in Avalon City, I was already mentally preparing for the next step. A self-driving car emblazoned with the Vakert logo, a glowing skull that practically screamed, "Yes, we deal with dark magic, and no, we don't care if you find it unsettling," was waiting for us. "Isn't that logo a bit much?" I asked as we slid into the car. "To you, maybe," Rose replied, chuckling. "To necromancers, it's practically a status symbol. If you ever visit the Western continent, you'll see it plastered everywhere." She wasn't kidding. In the Western continent, necromancy wasn't just accepted, it was celebrated. Vakert had built its reputation on catering to that very culture, becoming a powerhouse in the process. The car whisked us to Vakert's main branch in Avalon, a sprawling complex that gleamed with a mix of futurism and arcane artistry. We were ushered inside without delay, staff bowing politely to Rose as we made our way to a private elevator. As we descended to level B6, I felt the faint hum of powerful wards enveloping the space. When the elevator doors opened, we were greeted by three figures whose presence immediately commanded respect. They exuded a quiet strength, the kind that made you instinctively tread carefully. "Welcome, young lady," said the man in the center, his voice deep and resonant. He stepped forward, offering a nod to both of us. "I am Benjamin Vun, head necromancer of Vakert. These are my colleagues, Reed and Lily." "Arthur Nightingale," I introduced myself, shaking their hands in turn. Benjamin studied me with sharp, assessing eyes. "I understand you're looking to purchase the Blood Wyvern skeleton. This is not a transaction we take lightly. The materials involved, as you know, are of the highest caliber." "I wouldn't expect anything less," I replied smoothly. "Very well," Benjamin said. "As you are aware, there are 4 critical components to assembling a lich: the skeleton, the source, the skull, and the staff. Additionally, given your mana rank of high silver, controlling a lich of this level will require significant measures. Please, walk us through your preparations." I nodded, touching my spatial ring. With a flicker of mana, 3 items appeared on the table before us. "This," I began, gesturing to the first item, "is an ancient-grade artifact. I'll be integrating it into the staff to suppress the lich's power, allowing me to maintain control." The second item was placed beside it, a skull that seemed to radiate a dark, almost sentient energy. Its surface was etched with runes so ancient they looked more like cracks in reality than markings on bone. "This is the skull of an arch-lich. I intend to use it as the mind aspect." Finally, I revealed the basilisk heart. It pulsed faintly, a living rhythm that made the air around it feel heavy with potential. "And this will serve as the source, the soul aspect." The 3 professionals stared at the items in silence, their expressions a mix of awe and disbelief. "Incredible," Reed murmured, his hands twitching as though resisting the urge to reach out and touch the materials. "These are extraordinary." far beyond what most necromancers ever dream of working with. Lily, the alchemist, leaned in to examine the artifact. If we integrate this into the staff, it'll enhance the suppression mechanism while maintaining the harmony of the components. Benjamin, ever the professional, nodded approvingly. Your materials are indeed exceptional. The challenge now lies in ensuring that the skeleton harmonizes with these components. The Blood Wyvern's dark mana affinity is a strong match, but adjustments will be necessary to align it with the Arch-Lich skull and the Basilisk heart. He gestured for us to follow him into a laboratory lined with shelves of preserved specimens and glowing tools. In the center of the room, suspended within a transparent stasis field, was the Blood Wyvern skeleton. Its blackened bones gleamed faintly, runes etched along the spine pulsating with latent power. "This is the skeleton in question," Benjamin said. "Shall we begin the compatibility analysis?" I nodded, stepping closer to the skeleton. As the process began, I couldn't help but feel a rush of anticipation. The laboratory hummed with quiet energy as Benjamin, Reed, and Lily prepared to begin the compatibility analysis. The Blood Wyvern skeleton floated in its stasis field, runes etched along its length pulsating like the heartbeat of some ancient, dormant predator. Benjamin gestured to a large table, and a holographic projection of the skeleton appeared above it. A network of runes and mana pathways lit up in intricate patterns. First, we'll analyze the existing structure and mana resonance of the skeleton. Reed, run the baseline check. Reed nodded, stepping forward. He placed his hands on a console, his fingers moving deftly across glowing glyphs. The skeleton's structure began to shimmer in layers, its internal mana pathways appearing like a glowing web within the projection. Structural integrity is flawless. Dark mana resonance is excellent, ideal for necromantic applications. This skeleton is a textbook case for compatibility, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Lily tapped her chin thoughtfully, leaning closer to the projection. The challenge will be integrating the Basilisk heart. Its mana signature is far denser than the Blood Wyvern skeleton. If the pathways can't handle the sheer output of the source, it could destabilize the Lich during its creation. True, Benjamin agreed, his brow furrowed. However, the Arch-Lich skull offers a unique advantage. Its runic structure has an inherent ability to regulate mana flow. The trick will be balancing the resonance of the skeleton with the regulatory properties of the skull, while ensuring the heart doesn't overwhelm the system. I suggest reinforcing the skeleton's mana pathways, Reed said, zooming in on a section of the hologram. Here, along the spine and the ribcage, we can inscribe additional stabilizing runes to channel the excess output from the Basilisk heart without disrupting the harmony. Lily nodded. Yes, and we can enhance the mana programming pathways to synchronize with the artifact in the staff. The artifact's suppression properties will act as a safety net, preventing the heart's energy from exceeding the skeleton's limits. Exactly, Benjamin said, his voice steady but focused. But the mana programming must be precise. Arthur will need to use his own dark mana to fill these pathways, effectively binding the components together. If there's even a slight deviation, the entire structure could collapse. They turned to me, their eyes sharp and calculating. Arthur, Benjamin said, this isn't just about the quality of the materials. You'll need to actively program the mana pathways using your dark mana. Given the complexity of these components, it will require absolute precision and a deep understanding of dark mana. Are you prepared for that? I nodded. I've been preparing for this for months. And with these materials, I know I can make it work. Benjamin gave a small, approving nod before turning back to the others. Let's finalize the adjustments. The three of them worked seamlessly, their ideas bouncing off each other in rapid-fire succession. Reed suggested a unique rune pattern inspired by ancient necromantic texts, which Lily modified to improve mana efficiency. Benjamin, ever the perfectionist, overlaid additional layers of protection to ensure stability during the integration process. Finally, after what felt like hours, the holographic projection solidified. The skeleton was now overlaid with an intricate lattice of runes and pathways, each one glowing faintly in anticipation of the energy it would soon channel. Benjamin stepped back, folding his arms across his chest. Compatibility is excellent. The Blood Wyvern skeleton will harmonize perfectly with the Basilisk heart, Arch-Lich skull, and the artifact staff once properly inscribed and programmed. He turned to me, his expression both serious and satisfied. Now for the cost. I held my breath. $32 billion, Benjamin said evenly. This includes the skeleton itself, the rune inscriptions, and the mana programming pathways. Once the modifications are complete, the skeleton will be given to you in a state ready for integration. You will need to use your dark mana to bind the components together and complete the lich. I exhaled slowly, the number ringing in my ears. 32 billion. It was an astronomical sum, but I already knew the value of what I was building. This wasn't just a project, it was an investment in my future. I'll make the down payment today, I said, my voice steady. Very well, Benjamin replied. We'll begin the modifications immediately. With the materials you've provided, this will be one of the most extraordinary liches ever created.
Chapter 122, Mana Programming.
After I'd finished signing the contract with Vakert, carefully scrawling my name on enough pages to rival the weight of the skeleton I was buying, I handed over the down payment with a heavy heart and heavier wallet. The ancient grade sword from my personal collection gleamed mockingly as I placed it into the hands of Vakert's representative as collateral. It felt like a betrayal of sorts, like giving up a loyal companion to pay rent. But sacrifices had to be made, and this particular sacrifice was one step closer to the absurd goal of creating a lich. A fair trade? Time would tell. Rose, ever the gracious host, waited patiently by the exit, scrolling idly through her hollow watch. You done selling your soul? She asked with a smirk as I joined her. Just about, I replied, though I might need to sell a bit more if I ever want that sword back. She laughed, the kind of laugh that managed to be both friendly and mocking. Oh, don't worry. I'll make sure Vakert keeps it polished for you. Let's go. You've been glaring at those papers for so long I'm afraid you might turn them to ash. We stepped out of Vakert's sleek, fortress-like building and into the vibrant streets of Avalon City. It was hard to stay in a grim mood in a city like this. The air was temperature-controlled, the sky always an unnatural but oddly comforting shade of blue, and the streets pulsed with the quiet hum of vehicles. Rose insisted we explore, and who was I to argue? After all, she just helped me secure one of the most valuable skeletons I could ever dream of. Our first stop was a floating cafe that hovered a few meters above ground, tethered by shimmering cables that sparkled in the sunlight. The coffee wasn't particularly memorable, but the view of the city's winding streets, interwoven with towering crystalline skyscrapers, was worth every overpriced sip. You know, Rose said, stirring her drink with a faintly glowing spoon, you've officially ruined my standards. I don't think I'll ever be able to look at another client's project without thinking, well, it's not a lich. I'll take that as a compliment, I said, though the corners of my mouth twitched into a smile. It is, she said, grinning. You're ambitious, Arthur. That's a rare quality. Dangerous, but rare. We wandered through the marketplace next, where vendors displayed wares ranging from intricately enchanted trinkets to fresh produce that seemed to glow faintly with stored mana. Rose dragged me to a stall selling necromantic books. Most of them overpriced junk, but a few caught her eye. This one's about enhancing undead reflexes, she said, holding up a thick tome bound in what looked suspiciously like snake skin. Not your style. Not unless I want my lich to dance, I replied. She snorted and put it back. As the day wore on, we ended up at one of Avalon's countless parks, where artificial streams meandered between carefully arranged trees and flowers. Thanks, Rose, I said, breaking the companionable silence as we sat on a bench overlooking the water. For everything, the connections, the advice, the plane. You didn't have to do any of it. She looked at me, startled for a moment, before her expression softened. Oh, don't get all sentimental on me now, she said, though there was a warmth in her tone that hadn't been there before. I didn't do it for charity, you know. I expect a full tour of this lich when you've made it. Deal, I said. When it was finally time to leave, the flight back to Mythos Academy felt quieter, though not unpleasantly so. Rose dozed off halfway through the trip, her hollow watch still glowing faintly as it displayed some report or another. I stared out the window, watching the world blur below, my mind already racing ahead to the next steps. The skeleton was secured, but the real work was just beginning. When we landed, Rose yawned and stretched, giving me a lazy wave as she headed off toward her dorm. I lingered for a moment, letting the reality of it all settle. $32 billion. A blood wyvern skeleton, and a lich waiting to be born. Back to work, I muttered to myself, dragging my thoughts away from the brief respite of social interaction and toward the mountain of tasks looming ahead. My room greeted me with its usual silence, the quiet punctuated only by the faint hum of the manna light above. It wasn't exactly cozy, but it was mine, and right now it was the perfect space to dive back into the abyss of theory and planning. The white star was still an enigma, a puzzle I couldn't quite crack. For hours, I pored over notes, books, and arcane diagrams, the intricate glyphs almost mocking me with their stubborn refusal to align into clarity. It wasn't like the black star that had come to me through a forced epiphany, a searing moment of intuition that burned itself into my understanding. This required finesse, a light touch, and a kind of conceptual elegance I was still grasping for. When my brain felt like it had turned into mush, I switched gears to studying the Lich. That, at least, felt more manageable. The forced epiphany I'd experienced while acquiring the basilisk heart had elevated my grasp of dark mana to something tangible, something intuitive. It was as if the once impenetrable web of necromantic theory had untangled itself just enough for me to start weaving it into something functional. After hours of study, I collapsed into bed, the weight of knowledge and ambition pressing down on me as I drifted into restless sleep. Oh gods, what the hell did you do? Professor Gravemore's voice boomed, startling the class as his eyes locked onto me. I blinked at him, unsure of how to respond. I formed my black star, I said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I needed it for my Lich, didn't I? The professor stared at me, slack-jawed for a moment, before pinching the bridge of his nose and muttering something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like I need a drink. He straightened, peering at me as if I'd grown a second head. You do, he finally said. But how in the name of the 12 elements did you manage to form something like that with your constitution? I shrugged. Talent, I offered innocently. Gravemore groaned, rubbing his temples. No, I suppose thinking about it will only hurt my brain more. Let's just move on before I lose the will to teach altogether. I couldn't help the small smirk tugging at my lips as the rest of the class looked at me like I just casually announced I'd solved world hunger. Gravemore waved me closer to his desk, pulling out a series of scrolls that looked older than the building itself. All right, he began, his voice slipping into lecture mode. Now that you've decided to set the bar absurdly high for yourself, we need to address the next critical aspect. The source. As you know, the source will house the artificial program soul for your Lich. It's the heart of the construct. Pun very much intended, and easily the hardest part to get right. I nodded, leaning in, eager to absorb every word. Gravemore tapped the scrolls meaningfully. A soul, whether artificial or real, is not just a repository of memories or emotions. It's a mechanism, a symphony of interconnected functions that allow independent thought, reaction, and adaptation. Programming a soul artificially is like trying to write a symphony for an orchestra that doesn't exist yet. Every line of mana code must be flawless, every function harmonized with the skeleton and the skull. Otherwise, the whole construct collapses. But, I interrupted cautiously, can I not put a real soul into it and make it fully sentient? Gravemore paused, staring at me with an unreadable expression. Then he sighed, rubbing his eyes as if my audacity had physically aged him. No, he said flatly, and I'll explain why before you decide to do something catastrophically stupid. The room seemed to tense as he leaned forward. There are tiers to necromantic creation. Liches made with artificial souls like the one you're attempting are considered advanced constructs. They are autonomous but lack true sentience. Wild liches, those that form naturally, possess real souls, which grant them true sentience, and far more volatility. However, what you're asking about is something far rarer, a controlled lich with true sentience. That, my dear overachieving student, is the crown jewel of necromancy. It is the domain of absolute monsters, necromancers so skilled, so godlike in their craft, that they can bind and control a sentient ancient undead. The air in the room felt heavier as Gravemore's words sank in. His eyes flicked briefly to Jean, who was seated quietly, his stoic expression betraying nothing. Then his gaze returned to me. Even for the most skilled necromancers in history, achieving that level is rare. And you, Arthur, are walking an entirely different path. You're building a lich from scratch, using materials so high-end they'd make half the Western continent weep with envy. What you're attempting is unprecedented for someone at your level. And while it's ambitious, commendable even, it's also incredibly dangerous. Got it? I said, keeping my tone light despite the weight of his warning. No sentient soul for now, just a perfectly programmed artificial one. Gravemore nodded, though his eyes still held a trace of doubt. Good. Now, let's focus on the theory. You've got the basilisk heart, an incredible source. But to integrate it properly, you'll need to refine your mana pathways and design an intricate lattice of commands that will allow the artificial soul to interface seamlessly with the skeleton and skull. He gestured to the scrolls on the desk, unfurling one to reveal a dizzying array of diagrams, equations, and mana construct glyphs. We'll start with the basics, but don't let that fool you. This will be the hardest part of your project. Are you ready? I nodded, my hands already itching to dive into the work. The road ahead was daunting, but I couldn't deny the thrill of the challenge. This wasn't just about creating a lich anymore. It was about mastering the impossible. Chapter 123. Mana programming, in essence, was the art of weaving magic into the fabric of reality. It involved inscribing runes, circles, and intricate patterns into an object or substance in such a way that it could channel, invoke, or store magic. The process was painstaking and exacting, requiring a blend of artistry and mathematical precision. Each rune was a command, each circle a system. Together, they formed a kind of mana code, a mystical equivalent of the programming that ran the tech systems of the modern world. The thing about mana programming, Professor Gravemore began, pacing in front of me like an agitated crow, is that it's not as forgiving as your modern gadgets. You make a typo in mana code, and the worst-case scenario isn't a glitchy app. It's an explosion. Or worse, you might accidentally create a sentient magical abomination that thinks it's your parent and decides to ground you for all eternity. He stopped, fixing me with a look that suggested he half expected me to try it just to see what would happen. And let's be very clear, Arthur. You cannot, under any circumstances, create an artificial soul from scratch. It's impossible.
Utterly, entièrement impossible.
I raised an eyebrow. Then how am I supposed to make a lich? Gravemore waved a hand toward the basilisk heart sitting in a containment field nearby. That's where the source comes in. The source, your ridiculously high-quality basilisk heart, already contains what we call a soul basis. Think of it as the skeleton key to the soul, a foundational framework on which we can build. The mana code we inscribe won't create the soul. It will guide and shape the soul basis into a functioning lich soul, programmed to obey and act as intended. He paused, his gaze lingering on the basilisk heart with an odd mixture of admiration and concern. But therein lies the problem. Your source isn't just any source. It's from a basilisk, a mythical creature of unfathomable dark mana affinity and natural intelligence. That means the soul basis is incredibly potent, and if you're not careful, it might, well, push back. Push back, I repeated. Push back, he confirmed. It might resist your programming, try to overwrite your mana code, maybe even take control of the entire construct and decide it doesn't particularly like being your lich. That's why your cheat method will be crucial. It simplifies the process and suppresses the source's natural autonomy. Still, it's not a walk in the park. Before you even think about programming the source, you'll need practice. Lots of practice. He gestured for me to follow him to his desk, where a series of diagrams, equations, and runic patterns were spread out like the blueprints for a miniature universe. Now, let's break down the mana programming involved in connecting the staff, skeleton, skull, and source. Each component has to function as part of a greater whole. It's not just about inscribing runes and circles. It's about ensuring the mana flows seamlessly between them, like blood through veins. He tapped a diagram of the skeleton. The skeleton's programming is the simplest. Vakert will handle most of it for you, basic mana code for structural reinforcement and mana conductivity. You won't need to lose sleep over this part. Then he pointed to the skull. The skull, representing the mind aspect, is more complex. It needs programming to process and interpret commands, as well as to harmonize with the source's soul programming. This is where things start to get tricky. Finally, he jabbed a finger at the basilisk heart. And then there's the source, the soul aspect. This is where everything can and will go wrong if you're not meticulous. You'll need to craft the mana code that governs the soul's autonomy, loyalty, and functionality. And the hardest part of all? Bringing the source, skeleton, and skull into harmony. A lich isn't just a sum of its parts. It's a singular entity, and getting those parts to act as one requires precision most summoners can only dream of. He paused, looking me over like a jeweler appraising a rough gemstone. Vakert can handle some of the programming for the source and skull if you can afford it. Frankly, I'd recommend it. They're leagues ahead of me in terms of technical expertise. But no matter how much you outsource, the final stage will be entirely up to you. And that stage is? I asked. Gravemore smiled grimly. Injecting your own dark mana. Specifically, from your black star. It will act as the final binding force, tying all the components together into a cohesive whole. But doing so will be the hardest thing you've ever done. The amount of control, concentration, and raw willpower required is, well, let's just say it's not something most people would even attempt. I stared at the diagrams, the sheer complexity of the task settling over me like an unrelenting storm cloud. Each line, each rune, seemed to hum with potential disaster if misplaced. The enormity of the challenge was clear, but I wouldn't back down now. All right, I said, the resolve in my voice steadier than I felt. Let's get started. Professor Gravemore nodded approvingly, though his expression carried the weariness of someone who had seen far too many bright-eyed students crash and burn. Good, he said. I'll assign you a foundational task, something to stretch your capabilities but also ground you in the essentials. The trifold sequence. It's the heart of the lich assembly process, the framework that ensures the mind, body, and soul work in harmony. Without it, your lich is nothing more than an elaborate paperweight. It won't be easy, but if you can master this, you'll be ready to take the next step. I nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle onto my shoulders. This wasn't just an assignment. It was the key to proving I could succeed where even seasoned necromancers hesitated to tread. Curiosity tugged at me, though, as it often did. Professor? I asked. Have you ever made a lich yourself? Gravemore paused, his eyes narrowing slightly before he extended a hand. The air shimmered as he summoned something through a portal. The temperature in the room dropped, the shadows deepening unnaturally. Then it stepped out. A wave of oppressive dark mana hit me like a freight train, and I almost leapt out of my seat. A figure emerged, tall, skeletal, and radiating a presence so malevolent it was like the embodiment of a nightmare given form. Its eye sockets burned with twin points of cold, unfeeling light, and intricate runes glowed faintly along its bones. A 7-star lich, Gravemore announced, his voice reverent but calm. Every component crafted with precision using 7-star materials. It has served me faithfully, though what you're attempting, Arthur, will far surpass it. When completed, your lich will be leagues beyond this one in potential. If, he emphasized the word with a steely look, you manage to unlock its full power. The lich tilted its head slightly, as if it had heard the challenge and found it amusing. Then Gravemore waved his hand, dismissing it back into the portal with a faint shimmer and a low, echoing hum. You see now, he said, his tone heavy, the enormity of what you've taken on. The materials you've gathered are extraordinary, yes, but assembling them into something functional, something truly remarkable, will demand everything from you. Skill, will, intellect, and patience. You cannot rush this, Arthur. The cost of failure is not just monetary. I nodded, the gravity of his words settling deep into my mind. I understand. I'll send the source and skull to Vakert for basic mana programming. I can't afford to make mistakes on this. Good, Gravemore said. Let them handle the preliminary runes and pathways. Their expertise will ensure a solid foundation. You've chosen a path most wouldn't even dare dream of walking. But if you succeed, his voice softened, though the intensity remained, I will be very proud. His words stirred something in me, not just determination, but a flicker of pride in the challenge itself. I bowed deeply. Thank you, Professor. He dismissed me with a wave, muttering something about needing to prepare a stronger headache potion. I left the classroom, the cool air of the hallway a stark contrast to the oppressive energy I had just felt. Failure wasn't an option. I had the skull, the source. Soon, the skeleton would be ready. This was a project that would demand everything I had, and more. And I would succeed. I had to. Chapter 124, Valentine's Day. A week passed in a blur, with every moment filled to the brim. I wasn't just focused on dark mana and light mana anymore. Every facet of my training needed sharpening. My spellcasting had to be seamless, my swordsmanship flawless, and my mana rank constantly advancing. If I wanted to achieve everything I had set my sights on, I couldn't afford even a single weak link. 2 months. That's how long it would take until I reached white rank. I had been stuck at high silver rank for over 3 months now, clawing my way up with the help of my illegal training method. It was finally paying off, but the strain was enormous. Each leap forward demanded more intensity, more mental endurance, more pain. And while the thought of abandoning the method was a relief, I couldn't help but acknowledge its necessity. If I had to push any further, I wasn't sure my mind could withstand the strain. And now here we were, February 14th. Valentine's Day, or at least the version of it that existed in this world. Like most things, it was wildly different from what I remembered from Earth. Professor Nero addressed us with his usual flair for formality. As you may know, Valentine's Day is celebrated on the day Emperor Julius Slatemark proposed to his future wife. His voice was deep and steady, the kind that demanded attention even from the most inattentive student. It is a day to celebrate love in all its forms, not merely romantic, but also platonic and familial. Respect these bonds. They are what make us human. There was a thoughtful silence when he finished, though that silence didn't last long. Soon, the classroom hummed with quiet chatter as students began pulling out chocolates, flowers, and notes to exchange with their friends. Or, in some cases, their crushes. I wasn't expecting much. Valentine's Day was more of a background event in the novel. At least it had been for Arthur Nightingale. But then again, my life had diverged from the novel in so many ways already, so maybe I should have seen this coming. Arthur, Rachel's familiar voice called, and I looked up to see her standing at my desk with a bright smile and a tiffin box in her hands. Her golden hair shimmered as if catching sunlight that wasn't even there. She held out the box like it was the most natural thing in the world. I made some chocolates. Tell me if you like them. Okay? Her smile could have powered half the city's lights. Thanks, Rach, I said, taking the tiffin from her. She gave me one last dazzling grin before turning on her heel and walking back to her seat. No sooner had she left than Cecilia swooped in, moving with the kind of hurried determination that suggested she was trying to get this over with before she could change her mind. She held out an elaborately designed box, the kind you'd see in the display window of a luxury chocolatier. Here, she said, thrusting the box toward me. Her usual teasing air was nowhere to be found, replaced by something quieter, more uncertain. I'm giving it to you sincerely, okay? And before I could say a word, she spun around and practically fled back to her seat, leaving me holding a box that probably cost more than most people's monthly groceries. I blinked, trying to process the sudden influx of sugar-based affection. Before I could fully recover, Serafina appeared, her silver hair as immaculate as always, her presence as quiet and commanding as the wind before a storm. She didn't say much, just set a box of chocolates on my desk with the kind of finality that suggested there would be no argument. Mint chocolate, she said simply. Eat. And then, without another word, she walked back to her seat, leaving me with a growing pile of chocolates and a room full of eyes sneaking glances at my desk. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the 3 boxes. One was warm and homemade, the kind of gift that radiated care and effort. Another was polished and expensive, wrapped in layers of elegance and thought. The last was straightforward, practical, and distinctly Serafina. 3 completely different personalities, reflected perfectly in their gifts. It was pleasant. I placed the 3 boxes carefully into my spatial ring, their weight, both literal and metaphorical, lingering in the back of my mind. It wasn't every day someone gave you chocolates, let alone 3 distinctly personal and meaningful ones. But there they were, nestled among my other items, a silent testament to connections I hadn't fully understood before. The second semester was proving to be different in more ways than just chocolates. The structure, for one, had shifted significantly and for the better. The first semester had felt like a relentless barrage of practical evaluations, as if the academy was determined to grind us down to our core and see what was left. 3 evaluations before midterms alone. And that didn't include the countless other challenges we faced. This semester, different, lighter in some ways, though no less important. We'd already completed the first practical evaluation during the field trip to Nimrin City. Now, only 2 major milestones stood between us and the end of the year, the end-of-year project and the Sovereign's Tournament at the year-end festival. I welcomed the change. It gave me room to breathe, to focus on growing not just in power, but in understanding. Because if I was going to achieve everything I'd set out to do, I needed to grow. A lot, and quickly. Lunch came around, and as I walked into the dining hall, the usual noise and energy greeted me like an old friend. Class A was already seated in our usual spot, the table at the far end of the hall that gave us just enough privacy to talk freely while still being part of the larger chaos. As I sat down, Rose appeared beside me, holding out a small box wrapped in silver paper. "Here," she said, plopping it unceremoniously in front of me. "Don't read too much into it. It's just a thank you for being a half-decent teammate during the field trip." I raised an eyebrow but took the box with a smile. "Thanks, Rose. I'll try not to let the flattery go to my head." "Good," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "It's already big enough for boxes now." I glanced at the other boys at the table. Lucifer's seat had become a small shrine of affection, stacked high with boxes of chocolates, flowers, and even a few handwritten notes. Ren, sitting next to him, wasn't far behind, though he seemed far less interested in the pile steadily growing beside his plate. Ian and Jean had modest collections compared to the top two, but even they had a handful each. It seemed I was squarely in the middle when it came to Valentine's popularity, less overwhelming than Lucifer and Ren, but still respectable. "Not bad," Rose said, catching me looking at my small but growing collection. "For someone who spends half his time buried in books and the other half fighting deadly beasts, you're doing all right." I shrugged. "I'm not competing." She snorted. "Sure you're not." As the chatter around the table continued, my gaze wandered over to Rachel. She was sitting a few seats away, chatting with Cecilia, though her eyes flicked over to me every so often. Finally, I leaned over. "Hey, Rach," I called softly. She turned, her golden hair catching the light as she smiled at me. "What's up?" "About the chocolates." I started. "How many did you make?" Her smile widened, her cheeks turning the faintest shade of pink. 12. I blinked. 12? Just for me? "Of course," she said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world.
I stared her, dumbfounded.
"You didn't make any for Lucifer?" Her expression flickered for a moment, her smile softening into something quieter, more sincere. "Why would I?" she asked. "I wanted to make chocolates for someone who's precious to me." That threw me off balance. I had assumed, well, something different. Something more in line with how things usually went in Class A, where Lucifer's presence loomed over everything like a green-eyed shadow. But Rachel wasn't looking at Lucifer. She was looking at me. Serafina, sitting nearby, sighed audibly, her icy blue eyes flicking between us. She reached up and made a little circling motion with her finger near her temple. The universal gesture for "are you dense?" I couldn't even muster a response, still caught up in the unexpected weight of Rachel's words. She had said it so plainly, so matter-of-factly, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Arthur," Serafina said finally, her voice calm but pointed, "change your thinking." And for the first time, I really thought about what she'd meant, about what Rachel had said, about the connections I'd been too busy or too blind to see. Chapter 125. Change my thinking. Serafina had said that to me so many times, like a mantra, like a warning. I had always brushed it off, tucked it away in the back of my mind like a note scribbled on a scrap of paper. But this time it hit differently. Her words didn't just linger. They echoed, growing louder and louder until they became impossible to ignore. My chair scraped the floor when I abruptly stood. The shrill sound seemed to slice through the murmuring hall, turning heads. Rachel, eyes wide, called after me. "Arthur," she said, a mixture of confusion and concern painting her features. "We have afternoon classes. Are you all right?" Crack. Something in my mind fractured with that single word. I cannot fully explain the noise, whether it was internal or external, but it rang in my ears like a shard of glass snapping under unbearable pressure. A dizzy spell followed, as though the entire hall shifted out of focus. My breath hitched, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if I was hearing my own thoughts echoing in my skull, or if the world around me was literally tearing itself apart. "I'm not feeling well," I managed, my voice distant to my own ears. I clutched at the air as though it might give me balance, but it was intangible, slipping through my fingers. I turned from Rachel, ignoring her outstretched hand. My body pivoted on autopilot, and I left the study hall with unsteady steps. Walking blurred into running. One moment, I was pacing briskly down a corridor. The next I was sprinting past startled classmates. The academy's ornate walls, lined with hollow displays of upcoming events, seemed to twist inward, narrowing into a labyrinth that offered no escape. Every stride echoed, a hammering tattoo that reflected my pounding heartbeat. There was no plan, just a primal urge to flee, to outrun the tumult inside my head. Doors and windows flashed by, flickers of illusions or advanced decorations I'd normally admire. But now they felt like threatening shapes, imposing and stifling. My lungs burned, but I kept going, driven by the crack I heard in my mind. It was like a fault line had opened in my psyche, each new step jarring it wider. I reached my dorm room without recalling how I navigated the labyrinth. One moment, I was in that never-ending corridor. The next I was stumbling through my door, and a suffocating hush enveloped me as it clicked shut behind me. My knees buckled, and I collapsed onto the floor in a heap, the polished surface cool against my sweating skin. Crack. Again. Louder, sharper, as if a giant hand was crushing delicate glass from the inside. I hissed in pain, hands flying to my head, trying in vain to press the noise out. My pulse hammered in my ears. My thoughts frayed, scattering across the surfaces of my memories. I felt reality shift again, or maybe it was my perception that lurched. The resulting vertigo made me want to scream. Time lost its grip. I couldn't tell if only seconds or entire hours passed. My breathing was ragged, each exhalation quivering as I tried to keep from sobbing. The ache in my chest and head merged, forming a tight coil of distress. Some intangible barrier, the one I'd erected around my heart, my mind, my entire life, had started to crumble, and it was terrifying. Crack. The final blow. A mental sound like 1,000 mirror shards raining onto a marble floor. My entire being clenched. I curled into myself, pressing my forehead to the floor. My body shivered. The illusions, the self-narrative I'd spun, all of it was unraveling in real time. I remembered, hazily, how I used to think of everyone around me as if they were characters in a grand story. Their roles, their arcs, the inevitabilities. None of it was real, was it? That was the excuse I told myself. That the world was a novel, a script, and I, the observer, was detached from true consequence. If something tragic happened, it was just part of the plot. If someone succeeded or failed, it was written to be so. They weren't real to me. They were placeholders. Or worse, objects to manipulate. And now, those illusions, those mental constructs, shattered. The sense of control that came from believing I was above the narrative, that the people around me were non-playable roles, dissolved like sugar in water. I gasped, coughed, and forced my eyes open. The reality of my small room felt oppressive. No illusions softened the corners. No wise narrator's voice explained the next chapter. Instead, I was just a person, stuck on a cold floor with the weight of 1,000 regrets pounding in my skull. What have I been doing? I muttered aloud, a broken rasp. My voice trembled, unrecognizable. Memories flooded in with painful clarity. The times I brushed off Cecilia's attempts to connect, mocking her manipulative aura without acknowledging her real feelings. The times I ignored Rachel's unwavering kindness, taking it for granted as a predetermined trait of her character. The times Serafina spoke truths to me, urging me to see the world for what it was, and I dismissed them as side dialogue in a novel. They weren't side characters. They were living, breathing humans with emotions, motivations, vulnerability. And I had treated them all like props. The realization hit me like a physical punch, and I doubled over, hugging my knees. My nails bit into my arms as I wrestled the wave of shame. The next day or so passed in a fog. I barely left the floor. I drifted in and out of shallow dozing, nightmares tangling with half-conscious regrets. Hunger pricked my stomach, but I couldn't muster the will to eat. My phone beeped occasionally with messages or class reminders. I ignored them. The only thing that seemed real was the breakdown in my mind, as though I had to soak in the consequences before I could reemerge. During that time, I remembered glimpses. Rachel's gentle concern when I was ill, Cecilia's teasing comments that sometimes veiled genuine worry, even Lucifer's stoic presence that might have shielded me once or twice. Each memory was no longer just a snippet in a story. It felt heartbreakingly human, raw, as if I'd been colorblind and was only now seeing hues for the first time. I realized the hollowness of the emotional distance I had created. Was I this blind to their struggles, their joys, their pains? The question reverberated. On the third day, something in me shifted. Maybe it was survival instinct. Maybe it was a spark of defiance. Lying on the floor, wallowing in guilt and sorrow, couldn't fix anything. Slowly, I propped myself up. My limbs felt weak, a dull ache radiating along my muscles. My reflection in the mirror across the room looked gaunt, eyes ringed with dark circles, hair disheveled. I took a shaky breath, placed a hand on my chest, and felt my heart beating. Steady, persistent, real. I stared at my reflection, letting the last vestiges of denial drain away. There were no chapters, no cunning author controlling my strings. It was just me, stumbling along in a complicated, real world. The question was, could I stand literally and metaphorically? I forced myself to my feet. My head spun. My knees wobbled. I braced against a shelf, rummaging for a bottle of water. Gulping down half of it, I realized how dehydrated I was. This is real. This is what your life is like if you don't pretend it's all a game. I reminded myself. The dryness in my throat, the hunger pangs in my stomach, the trembling of my hands. These were incontrovertible facts, not mere script details. This was real. I was real. Chapter 126. I picked up one of the chocolates Rachel had given me and bit into it. It was rich and sweet, with a faint bitterness that melted away on my tongue. Then I reached for Cecilia's box, then Seraphina's, then Rose's. Each had its own flavor, its own personality. Rachel's was handmade, a little imperfect but undeniably warm and comforting. Cecilia's was elaborate and expensive, sharp and bold. Seraphina's was cool, minty, and refreshingly straightforward. Rose's was sweet, playful, and just a little surprising. I set the boxes down, staring at them. Each one was so distinct, so real. I see now, I thought. For the first time I truly saw. Even though I did care for them, each of them in their own way, I had never really seen them. To me they were roles, characters playing their part in a story I thought I already knew. I had boxed them in, reduced them to archetypes in the grand narrative of a novel. That was why Seraphina had been disappointed in me. That was why her words had echoed so loudly. I don't know how I came to this world, I thought. But it's not just some fantasy, not just a novel. The plot had already changed too much. People weren't adhering to their roles. They were alive, making choices I could never predict, and now it was clear. They weren't here to serve my story. They were their own stories, and I couldn't treat them as anything less. Thanks, Seraphina, I thought, feeling the weight of my realization settle in. She'd seen the cracks in my thinking long before I did, nudging me toward them until I couldn't ignore the truth. It was Saturday, and I pulled out my phone. I shot a quick message to Rachel and Cecilia, apologizing for my silence over the past few days and assuring them I was okay. Rachel replied immediately, her text full of concern, while Cecilia sent a curt but genuine, "Glad you're fine, dummy." Then I texted Seraphina. Just 2 words, "Thank you." Finally, I texted Rose. "Are you free today? I need to go to Avalon City." Rose replied almost instantly. "Free as a bird. Meet me at the warp gate." I grabbed my things and headed out. Rose was waiting for me at the warp gate, leaning casually against one of the sleek metal pillars. She straightened up when she saw me, her crimson braid catching the light. "You look like hell," she said, blunt as ever. "Thanks," I replied dryly. "I'm fine, though." "You better be," she muttered, falling into step beside me as we entered the warp gate. "You vanished for days without a word." Rachel and Cecilia were worried. Even Seraphina looked like she was thinking about sending a search party. I smiled faintly. "I'm fine now. Just needed some time to think." Rose gave me a side eye but didn't press. "So what's the plan in Avalon? More skeleton business?" "Yeah," I said. "I need to finalize some work with Vakert. Basic programming for the source and the skull." She nodded. "All right. I cleared my schedule, so you've got me for the day." "Lucky you." The Vakert headquarters in Avalon City was as imposing as ever. The glowing skull logo seemed to glower at us as we approached, its eerie light contrasting with the otherwise futuristic elegance of the building. The receptionists greeted Rose with deference, bowing slightly as she led the way to the elevators. We descended to level B6, where Benjamin, Reed, and Lily were waiting in the same dimly lit lab as last time. Benjamin greeted us with his characteristic calm, while Reed gave a curt nod, and Lily offered a polite smile. "You're back sooner than I expected," Benjamin said, his sharp eyes glinting. "I assume you've made your decisions?" "I have," I said, placing the source and the skull on the table between us. "I want you to handle the basic programming for these." The three of them exchanged glances, murmuring quietly to each other. "It's a reasonable request," Lily said finally. "The source is the trickiest part, but for basic programming, it shouldn't take long." Reed leaned in, inspecting the basilisk heart with something akin to reverence. "Incredible material," he muttered. "The sheer potential here. Are you certain you want to handle the final coding yourself?" "I'm certain," I said. "But the foundational work, connecting it to the skeleton, ensuring compatibility, that's where I need your expertise." Benjamin nodded. "We can do that. It's a delicate process, but nothing beyond our capabilities." "How much will it cost?" I asked, bracing myself. "Nothing," Rose said, cutting in before Benjamin could answer. "This level of work is a fraction of what you've already paid for the skeleton. It's practically negligible in comparison." Benjamin inclined his head in agreement. "The young lady is correct. This is minor work compared to the assembly of the skeleton. Consider it part of the service." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Thank you." Rose smirked. "Don't thank me yet. They'll still want to take their time. You're working with some of the best in the field, and they'll make sure every detail is perfect." "I wouldn't expect anything less," I said, watching as Benjamin and his team began circling the materials like hawks, their murmurs carrying the weight of scholarly obsession. They were already tossing around terms I didn't fully understand, their voices a harmony of technical jargon and enthusiasm. Benjamin suddenly looked up. "Before you go, we need to discuss something." I paused, turning back to face him. "What is it?" He crossed his arms, his expression thoughtful yet faintly apologetic. "The issue now is the sheer disparity in the material's quality." My stomach tightened. "Disparity?" Benjamin gestured toward the table, where the skull, the skeleton plans, and the basilisk heart lay side by side like contestants in a macabre beauty pageant. The skull, as you know, is from a 9-star arch-lich, a specimen of unparalleled power. The skeleton, while exceptional, is from an 8-star blood wyvern. That's already a 1-star gap which we can work around. The real issue is the source. It's a full tier beyond even the 9-star arch-lich skull and 2 tiers above the skeleton. I frowned. "Does that make it impossible to assemble?" Lily shook her head. "Not impossible, but challenging. You're already planning to use a limiter for your control." "Yes." I nodded. "Good," Benjamin said. "We'll need to add another limiter, specifically targeting the basilisk heart. This will cap the lich's potential at 8-star until you upgrade the skeleton to match the other materials. Only then will the lich be able to ascend to 9-star and beyond. Without the limiter, the imbalance could destabilize the entire construct," Reed added, his tone grim. "It's not just about control, it's about keeping the thing functional. The basilisk heart alone has the potential to overwhelm the rest of the components." "But with the limiters, I can still upgrade it later?" I asked, my brows furrowing. "Precisely," Benjamin confirmed. "The limiters will ensure the lich's growth is in harmony with your materials and your mana rank. Once you obtain a 9-star skeleton, the path to creating an archlich will reopen." I let out a slow breath. "All right, I can live with that." Lily exchanged a glance with Benjamin, then added delicately, "There's one more thing. To apply the limiter effectively, we'll need to weaken the basilisk heart permanently." That hit like a punch to the gut. "Weaken it? Why?" "A basilisk heart is an artifact of unimaginable power," Reed explained. "Even with the limiters, it's a source worthy of a Lich King. To safely integrate it with the other components and ensure stability, we'll need to reduce its raw potency. Think of it as trimming down a masterpiece, not to ruin it, but to make it compatible with the rest of the structure." "But it won't stunt the Lich's potential?" I pressed.
No, Benjamin reassured me.
"The Lich's ultimate potential will remain unchanged. This is simply about making the components work together at their current levels. The growth of the Lich will still depend on your future upgrades." I paused, considering this. "What happens to the parts you cut off?" "They'll still retain a significant amount of power," Lily said, her voice measured. "Even as fragments, they'll be invaluable. You could sell them for a small fortune, easily more than you spent here at Vokert. That kind of material would be highly sought after by alchemists, researchers, even other necromancers." Luna's voice rang in my mind, calm but firm. "Don't sell it. There's something else you can use it for in the future. Trust me." "I'll keep the cut-off parts," I said finally, my voice steady. Benjamin inclined his head in approval. "A wise choice. We'll package them separately when the project is complete. It will take approximately a month to finalize everything. When it's done, you'll receive the program skeleton, skull, source, and the separated fragments of the basilisk heart. Thank you, I said, inclining my head toward the three of them. Benjamin gave a slight bow. Your ambition is admirable, Arthur Nightingale. We'll ensure it's matched by the quality of our work. As I turned to leave with Rose at my side, the gravity of what I was undertaking settled on my shoulders. This wasn't just a project anymore. It was becoming a battle of wit, resources, and sheer will, and I had no intention of losing. Chapter 127. After I wrapped up my work with the Vakert team, Rose caught my arm and flashed one of her ever-persistent smiles. How about a tour of the facility? She offered. Since you're here, might as well see what other treasures we have for necromancers and dark mages. I'm not exactly a necromancer, I pointed out, falling into step beside her. And technically, I'm more of a hybrid dark mage with a touch of insanity. She snorted. Semantics. You're building a lich from scratch, Arthur. That puts you squarely in the club whether you like it or not. Come on. Let me show you what our Empire of Gloom has to offer. We walked through a sleek, futuristic corridor lit with soft blue light, the walls lined with display cases that held items ranging from mundane dark mana trinkets to artifacts that pulsed faintly with power. Each case had a holographic label hovering beside it, listing specifications and astronomical price tags that could make even a dragon choke on its hoard. You know, Rose began, her voice taking on that breezy, conversational tone she used when she wanted to drop something heavy on me. When you successfully create your lich, you'll be one of only about 500 people in the world with one.
He paused, glancing at her.
500? I'd have thought there'd be more. Only ascendant rankers and above can even hope to make something like that, she said, running her fingers along the edge of a display case housing a cracked bone flute. The air around it hummed faintly, like it was desperate for someone to play it. And even then, most of them don't bother. It's too costly, too risky. Let's just say you're an exception to the rule. Yeah, but mine won't exactly be a top-tier lich at the start, I admitted, rubbing the back of my neck. And I'm sacrificing my potential as a full necromancer to make this work. Rose shrugged, her auburn hair catching the light like flickering embers. That's perfect for you, though. You're not a necromancer at heart, Arthur. You're let's call it a strategic innovator. And besides, she added with a smirk, you can at least have another summon down the line, right? Any thoughts on what that might be? Not yet, I said, shaking my head. I'd need to reach at least ascendant rank before I can even consider a second summon. Right now, all my focus is on the lich. Fair enough, she said. But you should still look around. It never hurts to know what's out there. She led me into a cavernous room filled with towering shelves that seemed to stretch into infinity. This was the heart of Vakert's inventory, a treasure trove of materials and tools for those willing, or insane enough, to dabble in the darker arts. Each shelf was lined with glowing orbs, shimmering powders, and preserved body parts sealed in transparent cases. Some items were labeled with mundane descriptions, like nightshade powder or void dust, while others bore ominous titles like Echo of the Forgotten or Fong of the Abyss. Over here, Rose said, steering me toward a corner section labeled Rare and Experimental Materials. This is where we keep the good stuff. Define good, I muttered, eyeing a jar containing what looked disturbingly like an eyeball suspended in golden liquid. The label read, All-Seeing Eye of Morgos, Last Gazer of the East. You'd be surprised, Rose replied, clearly enjoying my discomfort. For example, this. She pointed to a gleaming, obsidian shard encased in a glass cube. Shard of Midnight. Perfect for amplifying shadow-based attacks or creating temporary zones of absolute darkness. But the real kicker? It can also be used to disrupt light-based spells. Useful, I admitted, though my attention was drawn to a set of skeletal hands displayed nearby. They were arranged in a way that suggested they had once been clutching something, and the faint aura of desperation still clung to them. Also, if you do need a staff for the lich, we offer one, Rose said, steering us toward a more secluded area of the exhibit hall. Her tone had shifted slightly, less casual, more conspiratorial, as if she were about to reveal the crown jewel of Vakert's collection. We turned a corner, and the atmosphere changed entirely. The lighting dimmed, focusing all attention on a single display case in the center of the room. Suspended within, rotating slowly as if it were savoring its own grandeur, was a staff unlike any I'd ever seen. As you know, Rose began, her voice dropping into a practiced cadence that hinted at how many times she delivered this pitch. The staff doesn't just tie the three aspects together. It's also the Lich's window to the world. It grants spatial awareness, enhances its ability to control its surroundings, and acts as a stabilizing force for the soul aspect. A proper staff is crucial if you want your Lich to function as more than just a glorified skeleton mage. She gestured toward the staff in the exhibit, her hand lingering mid-air as if to emphasize its importance. I recommend this one. I stepped closer, reading the small holographic display that hovered beside it. Eternite Staff. The staff itself was a masterpiece of design. An elegant spiral of black and silver metal, tipped with a jagged shard of obsidian that pulsed faintly with a dark, rhythmic glow. Veins of light snaked through its shaft, pulsing faintly like it was alive. It looked less like a weapon and more like something pulled from the hands of a deity, forged in the heart of a dying star. It's an ancient-grade artifact, Rose explained, her voice carrying the kind of reverence one might use to describe a mythical beast, recovered from the border of the Western continent. It's incredibly high level even for an ancient-grade artifact. Perfect for your unique aspirations. If you want to build something as ridiculous as an archlich, this is what you'll need. And it's compatible? I asked, peering at the staff's faintly glowing tip. No issues with integration? Artifacts like this are surprisingly flexible, she said. Limiting them is much easier than, say, modifying a skeleton or source. You could tune this down to work for an 8-star Lich now and unleash its full potential later when you, well, grow into it. She smirked. All right, I said cautiously, already dreading the price. How much? 15 billion, she replied smoothly, as if she were talking about pocket change. Then, with a casual wave of her hand, she added, but for you, I'll knock it down to 13 billion. Friends and family discount. I blinked. 13 billion is a discount? Rose laughed, her auburn hair catching the dim light as she leaned closer. It's an ancient-grade artifact, Arthur. High-level even among its kind. These things don't exactly grow on trees. She wasn't wrong, but it didn't make the number any less staggering. $13 billion for a staff. It was more than most nations' annual budgets. But as my eyes drifted back to the Eternite staff, I couldn't deny its allure. The artifact seemed to hum with untapped potential, its glow promising a power that was almost within reach. All right, I said finally. But about my payments, I'm already paying for the skeleton in monthly installments. Can we keep that going and just add the staff to the same schedule? I'll pay the remainder in a lump sum once the I get them on I. Rose tilted her head, thinking for a moment before shrugging. Sure. The contract we made is flexible enough to handle that. You owe us 29 billion for the skeleton, right? Adding the staff will bump it up to 42 billion, but the terms won't change. Thank you, I said, and this time, the gratitude in my voice wasn't just politeness. Rose had gone above and beyond to make this ridiculous endeavor of mine possible. Don't thank me yet, she said with a grin. You still owe Vakert a fortune, and I'll personally make sure you pay every last cent. I laughed, shaking my head as we moved on to the next exhibit. The rest of the tour was a blur of artifacts, magical tools, and materials that I could only dream of affording. Rose continued pointing out items with the enthusiasm of someone who'd grown up in this world. She explained the history of a preserved dragon claw here, the uses of void glass dust there. There was even a set of enchanted bindings labeled Chains of Eternal Silence, designed to suppress rogue summons. It was equal parts fascinating and overwhelming. By the time we left Vakert's headquarters, the sun had dipped low on the horizon, painting Avalon City in hues of gold and crimson. We stepped into the self-driving car that would take us back to the warp gate. Rose, I said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled over us. Thank you for everything. She looked at me, her expression softer than usual. Don't mention it, Arthur. Just promise me one thing. What's that? She grinned. When you finally create this insane lich of yours, let me be the first to see it. I need to witness the moment it either becomes the most brilliant creation in history, or blows up in your face. I laughed, shaking my head. Deal. Chapter 128. Prelude to First Mission. All right, students, listen up, Professor Nero declared, his sharp voice cutting through the hum of conversation in the room. He leaned against the podium with the air of a man who knew he was about to ruin everyone's day and was thoroughly enjoying it. The headmaster, Eva Lopez, has decided to rework this semester's schedule. She's of the opinion that things have been a bit, how should I put it, too cushy. So here's the deal. Effective immediately, we've got ourselves another practical evaluation. A collective groan rippled through the class like an unenthusiastic wave at a half-empty stadium. Professor Nero's lips twitched, just shy of a smirk. Ah, I see you're all thrilled. Let me sweeten the pot for you. This time, you're going to be taking on a real mission. You'll be paired up, as usual, and tasked with leaving behind your academy identity. That means no flaunting your noble titles or your mythos badges. Out there, you're just another pair of adventurers trying to earn your keep. The room shifted. The students exchanged glances, a mix of apprehension and intrigue sparking in their eyes. Missions outside the academy were a whole different beast. Real stakes, real money, and real danger. Speaking of money, Nero continued, with the casualness of someone mentioning the weather, whatever you earn from the mission, you get to keep. Consider it a little reward for stepping into the real world. That got a few raised eyebrows. A practical evaluation with a payday? That was new. Now, Nero said, straightening, this will also be the last time you'll be working with your current partners. So make it count. Next year, you'll face a whole new system. This is just a trial run to prepare you for what's coming in the second year and beyond. I leaned back in my seat, my mind turning over the implications. So Headmaster Eva is making her presence felt. This wasn't something that happened in the novel. A deviation. It wasn't surprising, really. A living, breathing world wasn't bound to stick to the confines of a written plotline. The novel's events were a guide, not gospel. But still, the change left me with an uneasy sense of unpredictability. Professor Nero scanned the room, his gaze lingering on a few of the less attentive students as if daring them to yawn. Further details on the missions will be provided tomorrow, and the missions themselves are next week. Until then, consider this an opportunity to prepare yourselves, and to reflect on how much you rely on the Academy's safety net. Out there, it's a whole different game. With that, he dismissed the class, leaving behind an atmosphere buzzing with nervous energy. A real mission, I thought, the weight of it sinking in. This wasn't going to be just another test. Well, this is interesting, Ian remarked, leaning back in his chair with an easy smile. A real mission outside the academy, with real danger. It is, Ren agreed, his tone measured, though I could feel the weight of his violet eyes resting on me, as if he were trying to decode some hidden message in my expression. The conversation fizzled out after a few murmured exchanges. There wasn't much to discuss yet. Not until the specifics of the missions were revealed. So we went our separate ways off to the day's classes. For me, that meant light magic, one of the few classes where Rachel and I shared a schedule. Arthur, she said as we walked toward the classroom, her voice carrying that particular lilt she used when she was about to dive into something serious. I want to ask you something. What is it, Ratch?
He replied, glancing at her.
The sunlight caught in her golden hair as she walked, giving her an almost ethereal glow. Fitting for a saintess. How can you use light magic with dark magic? She asked, tilting her head slightly. I mean, those two elements are true opposites. They shouldn't coexist in the same person, let alone work together. I expected the question sooner or later, especially from her. Light and dark magic weren't just elements. They were philosophies, forces of nature that were never meant to overlap. Well, my gift helps, I said with a shrug. But I can't merge them together, if that's what you're thinking. It doesn't work like that. Light and dark magic were strange. They didn't play by the same rules as the other elements. Fire and water could coexist, albeit uneasily. Earth and wind could complement each other. But light and dark? They were the universe's greatest paradox. The ultimate absolutes. Their very existence seemed to demand conflict. They're fascinating, though, I added. There's a reason they were once thought to be completely separate from mana itself. Did you know most people with an affinity for light or dark magic can't use any of the other 9 elements? It's like their mana rejects anything else. Rachel hummed thoughtfully, her hands clasped behind her back as we walked. Honestly, if you could merge them, you wouldn't even be mortal, she said, a soft chuckle escaping her lips. It would break every rule of magic we know. She wasn't wrong. The idea was absurd on its face. Light magic and dark magic were as incompatible as oil and water, except oil and water at least had the decency to sit next to each other. Light and dark annihilated one another on contact. Darkness cannot exist in light. Light cannot exist in darkness. Still, Rachel continued, her tone lighter now, it's impressive that you can use both at all. Most people can only dream of having one. But you've always been a bit extraordinary. I smiled at her, though a part of me couldn't help but feel the weight of her words. Extraordinary was one way to put it, dangerous another. But for now, I let the conversation drift into easier topics as we reached the classroom. The paradox of light and dark magic lingering in the back of my mind like a puzzle I wasn't ready to solve. The light magic classroom was quieter than usual, a serene space that seemed designed for reflection and practice. Only two of us occupied the room, Rachel and I. It made the room feel even larger, its pristine white walls glowing faintly with the residual presence of light mana. The orbs of floating illumination above shimmered like suspended stars, their brilliance casting soft shadows across the marble floor. Professor Lysandra stood at the front of the room, her posture as perfect as her control over mana. She was a striking woman, with pale blonde hair pulled back into an elegant braid and eyes that could pierce through your thoughts. Light seemed to gather around her without effort, like an old friend drawn by her presence. Rachel and I practiced quietly at our desks, working through a series of controlled exercises to refine the way we channeled light mana. Rachel's ability with light magic was stunning, her spells elegant and fluid, as if the element itself bent willingly to her will. My own attempts, while competent, felt forced. It wasn't that I couldn't use light mana. I could, but it lacked the natural flow that Rachel's spells had. My connection felt more like a negotiation, hers a symphony. Professor, I began, hesitating for just a moment before continuing. I have a question. Ask, she said, her tone patient but direct. I recently formed a black star, I admitted. Her eyes widened slightly in surprise but quickly narrowed with curiosity. And I wanted to know if it's possible to form a white star too. Is that something I can even do? Lysandra set aside the ethereal orb of light she had been shaping and folded her hands, regarding me carefully. A black star, she repeated, her voice measured. And now you want a white star, Arthur. Do you understand what you're asking? I nodded. I know it's dangerous, but if I want to grow stronger with light magic, I need to push myself further. My gift lets me use both light and dark mana, so I thought it might be possible. She studied me for a long moment before letting out a quiet sigh. It is possible, she admitted. But forming a white star is no trivial feat, even for someone with a natural affinity for light mana. And you're a special case. Your gift may allow you to use both elements, but light and dark are natural enemies. They devour each other, Arthur. If you ever attempt to use both stars simultaneously, well, I imagine the result would be catastrophic. I swallowed hard. I wouldn't use them together. I just need to know if it's the same process as forming the black star. It is, she said, her voice tinged with warning. The principles are the same: compression, purification, and an unwavering focus. But forming a white star will demand an even higher level of precision. Light mana is finicky. It's less forgiving than dark mana. Any mistake, and you'll disrupt the harmony of the process. I nodded, absorbing her words. I knew forming a black star had been an uphill battle, but light mana had always felt more distant to me, less natural. It would be like trying to carve something delicate out of glass. One wrong move and it would shatter. And one more thing, she added, her tone sharper now. You need to make a choice, Arthur. Once you form a white star, you must never lose sight of the fact that it exists separately from the black star. They are not two halves of a whole. They are two worlds that must never meet. Keep them apart, always. I understand, I said, though the weight of her words settled heavily in my chest. The path ahead was becoming clearer, but it wasn't going to be easy. Chapter 129. Four-circle spells were a whole different beast compared to the simpler, more rudimentary ones I'd been perfecting in the past. While I had the Laplace method to help streamline my casting of five-circle spells, the four-circle ones still required the traditional approach. A precise balance of mana flow, structure, and sheer will. That's where Cecilia came in. Her expertise in spellcasting was leagues beyond mine, even without the aid of a mind aspect gift. She didn't need flashy tricks or shortcuts. She was just that good. We stood in one of the Academy's training arenas, a sprawling expanse lined with adjustable targets and enchantments that simulated real combat. Cecilia, as usual, was in full tutor mode, arms crossed, golden eyes sharp and unwavering, her regal presence almost oppressive. I was convinced she could critique the wind if it didn't blow just right. "All right, Arthur," she said, her voice crisp and authoritative. "Let's see you cast ether barrage again. And this time, try not to embarrass yourself." I sighed, raising my hand. "Your motivational speeches are inspiring as always." "Less sarcasm, more mana control," she shot back. I focused, drawing mana into my core and weaving it carefully into the spell. Ether barrage wasn't particularly flashy, but it was deceptively complex. A 4-circle spell that fired a series of pure mana projectiles, it required impeccable control to ensure each projectile maintained its shape and trajectory. Too much mana, and the spell destabilized. Too little, and the projectiles fizzled out before reaching their target. I launched the first wave. 3 projectiles streaked toward the targets, hitting them dead center. But as I tried to sustain the spell, the mana weave started to wobble. One projectile veered wildly off course, narrowly missing Cecilia's shoulder before smashing into a training dummy. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she arched an eyebrow and said, "Are you trying to kill me? Or is that just a bonus?" "Neither," I muttered, rubbing the back of my neck. "I thought I had it." "No, you didn't," she said bluntly. "Your mana distribution is all over the place. You're pouring too much into the initial weave and not leaving enough for the sustainment phase. Watch and learn." She stepped forward, raising her hand with an effortless grace that only Cecilia could manage. Mana flowed around her like a river, smooth, controlled, and impossibly steady. In seconds, she conjured a series of glowing projectiles, each one perfectly shaped and humming with energy. She flicked her wrist, and the projectiles launched, hitting every target in rapid succession with pinpoint accuracy. No wasted mana, no wobbling trajectories, just flawless execution. "That's how it's done," she said, lowering her hand and turning to me. "It's not about brute force, Arthur. It's about precision. Mana is a resource, not a battering ram." "Easy for you to say," I muttered, though I couldn't help but be impressed. "You make it look like second nature." "That's because it is," she said, her tone softening slightly. "But it wasn't always. It's just practice, Arthur. You're capable of this, you just need to stop overthinking it and let the mana flow naturally." I nodded, taking a deep breath and raising my hand again. This time I focused on her advice, visualizing the mana as a river rather than a storm. I wove the spell more carefully, letting the energy settle into a balanced flow. The first 3 projectiles launched cleanly, and for the first time I managed to sustain the spell long enough to fire a second wave. "Better," Cecilia said, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Still not perfect, but better." I grinned, feeling a small surge of pride. "Thanks, Cecilia." "Don't thank me yet," she said, her smile turning into a smirk. "You've got a long way to go before you can even think about challenging me." I chuckled, the tension easing from my shoulders. Training with Cecilia was exhausting, but it was also undeniably effective. "Anyway, you're becoming a real monster, aren't you?" Cecilia said, her tone breezy but her crimson eyes sharp, studying me like one might examine an overly ambitious science project. "What's your end-of-year project?" I hesitated for a moment. She didn't know yet, and a part of me braced for the inevitable explosion of disbelief. "I'm making a lich," I said, as casually as one might announce they were baking a cake. Cecilia's expression didn't shift. She simply nodded, her lips twitching upward in a polite, almost dismissive smile. "Oh nice, a lich is a good project." I blinked. That was it? No gasp of horror. No incredulous laughter? She might as well have told me I was working on a school essay. My brain did a double-take, trying to process the lack of reaction. "You're not surprised?" I asked, unable to stop myself. She smiled then, slow and deliberate. A smile that carried just enough coyness to make my stomach drop. "Oh, I am," she said, her voice lilting with amusement. "Trust me, I am." But then I remembered who I was talking to. I raised an eyebrow. And it's you," she said, crossing her arms and leaning slightly closer, her smile sharpening. "An idiot." So it made sense. I stared at her, caught somewhere between offense and reluctant amusement. "That's your logic?" "Absolutely," she said, straightening up and brushing an invisible speck of dust off her sleeve. "You're brilliant, Arthur. Don't get me wrong. But you're also the kind of person who hears impossible and takes it as a personal challenge. So yes, a lich. Of course you'd be making one. I opened my mouth to argue, realized she wasn't entirely wrong, and promptly closed it again. Well, thanks for the vote of confidence, I said dryly. She laughed then, a genuine warm laugh that somehow felt like it took the edge off her earlier teasing. You'll do fine, she said. You're crazy, but you're also well, you. I wasn't entirely sure what she meant, but the way Cecilia said it carried a confidence that made the air feel just a little lighter. So you think I'll succeed? I asked, tilting my head. A part of me couldn't resist fishing for a bit more of that oddly rare encouragement. Yeah, she said, her nod as casual as if she were agreeing on the weather. Fortune favors the bold, or in your case, the completely unhinged. Since you're utterly insane, luck seems to take pity on you and tags along. I blinked at her, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of my lips. I honestly don't know how to respond to that, I said, deadpan. You're welcome, she quipped, her smirk widening. Then, leaning forward slightly, her golden eyes locked onto mine with a glint that could only be described as both playful and dangerously sincere. It means I think you'll crush Lucifer. Wipe that smug look off his verdant face. You're too stubborn not to. That's quite the vote of confidence, I replied, raising an eyebrow. Don't make me regret it, she shot back, her smirk sharpening into something just a shade too sharp to be comforting. Because if you mess this up, Arthur, I'll never let you hear the end of it. Ever. There was something oddly reassuring in her taunts. Because under the sarcasm and sharp wit, there was no mistaking it. Cecilia genuinely believed I could do it. And maybe, just maybe, that made me believe it a little more too. Chapter 130. The mission came in a sealed envelope, its holographic seal flickering faintly before dissolving under my thumbprint. Serafina and I exchanged a glance as we skimmed the details. An assassination of a white ranker in a city deep in the southern continent. I could almost hear the unspoken thought passing between us. So much for easing into this new, practical evaluation. The academy didn't coddle its students. That much was clear. Killing was not just expected but baked into the curriculum by the second year, like an unpleasant but necessary ingredient in a recipe. This was no exercise or simulation. We were being taught the ugly, functional truth of the world. Sometimes, survival required you to pull the trigger or swing the blade, and sometimes, survival wasn't enough, you had to win. For now, the details of the mission were set aside, though the weight of it lingered in my mind. Instead, I turned my focus back to the ever-expanding labyrinth that was the theory of necromancy. The lich, my lich, was gradually taking form in my mind. Not physically, of course. It was still a scattered puzzle of components and calculations. But every hour I spent poring over Professor Gravemore's lectures, Vachert's reports, and my own research brought me closer to understanding how to bring it to life. Or well, unlife. Whatever. The deeper I delved, the clearer the difference between a lich and an arch-lich became. It wasn't just a matter of strength or rank. An arch-lich wasn't simply a leveled-up version of its lesser counterpart. It was a whole different beast. It required a new layer of magic, a convergence aspect, built around something called a nexus core. The source, powerful as it was, needed to be enhanced and harmonized with the skeleton and skull via astral threads, a more advanced and dangerous form of mana weaving. And all of this required astral energy, the compressed, refined form of mana used in the aura method. The complexity was staggering. If building a lich was like assembling a car, constructing an arch-lich was like engineering a spaceship. And that wasn't even accounting for the fact that I'd need to be much stronger myself, at least ascendant rank, to even attempt it. The idea was both daunting and exhilarating. For now, though, I had to be realistic. My goal was the 8-star lich, a monster powerful enough to shake the battlefield even in its limited form. But its true potential would be shackled, bound by my current rank and the limiters I'd placed on its components. In the quieter hours, I also turned my attention to light magic, hoping for progress on the White Star. My efforts were, frankly, less than stellar. I could feel the potential there, tantalizingly close yet maddeningly out of reach. The theory was sound, the techniques were practiced, but the breakthrough, the epiphany that would make it all click, eluded me. Light mana was as temperamental as its counterpart, dark mana, but in a completely different way. Where dark mana was like an unruly storm, chaotic but visceral, light mana was a quiet, elusive current. You couldn't force it, you had to understand it. But understanding didn't come easily. Not for me, at least. Every session ended with the same lingering frustration. I was close, but not close enough. I needed something to spark that missing connection, a revelation, an event, a push over the edge of understanding. For now, though, I had the lich to focus on. One impossible goal at a time. The staff had been commissioned from Vakert, a monumental step forward, though the bill for it loomed over me like a storm cloud. Still, it wasn't enough. I should absolutely ask, no, demand, something else from Alastair after I win against Lucifer, I thought with a smirk. He practically threw the skull at me. He's invested, whether he admits it or not. And Arden, well, I'll make him cough up something valuable too. A radiant rancor shouldn't be so stingy. The thought of Lucifer was always there, lingering in the back of my mind like a rival shadow. In many ways we were equals, yet utterly different. His mastery of the sword was superior to mine, no argument there. But he didn't have dark mana or light mana, the two rarest, most potent elements. I had both. That was my edge, though my edge was a double-edged blade, requiring mastery of two forces that hated each other at their core. Still, I would wield it. This wasn't a novel anymore. It hadn't been since I got here. The idea of a protagonist, of someone destined to win, was a comforting lie. There was no destiny, no script to follow. There was just the world and what I chose to make of it. And I wasn't going to let Lucifer win. The mission was straightforward in its brutality. Assassination. The target was a white rancor residing in a city deep in the southern continent. Serafina and I were tasked with infiltrating and eliminating him. No questions asked. The Academy didn't mince words when it came to these evaluations. This was a real mission, not a training exercise. I found Serafina in the library, quietly flipping through a book on ice magic. Her serene presence was as sharp and cold as ever, a contrast to the heat of the southern continent where we were heading. "Ready for the mission?" I asked, sitting across from her. Her silver blue eyes glanced up at me, unruffled. "I'm always ready. Are you?" "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, leaning back in the chair. "It's an assassination, after all. I doubt they're rolling out a red carpet for us." She gave a small nod. "We'll need to be efficient."
No unnecessary risks.
"Of course," I said, though efficiency wasn't exactly my forte. I liked having a bit of flair. Our preparation wasn't flashy, but it was meticulous. We packed the essentials: weapons, mana potions, and tools for the mission. Our Mythos Academy student IDs acted as universal visas, a privilege afforded to us by the Academy's unparalleled influence. With the IDs, we bypassed the usual bureaucratic hassle and were cleared to travel to the southern continent instantly. The Maraspa city was a mix of old and new. Ancient stone structures stood shoulder to shoulder with sleek, futuristic buildings. Cars zipped through the streets, weaving between towering skyscrapers and over bustling markets. The heat was noticeable, though not unbearable, thanks to the temperature-controlled climate systems embedded into the city's infrastructure. As we disembarked, the hum of life in the city hit us like a wave. Vendors shouted over the din of haggling customers, and the air was thick with the smell of spices and street food. "Let's not draw attention," Serafina said, pulling the hood of her cloak up. "I'd rather not get mobbed by fans anyway," I joked, earning an unimpressed glance from her. Our first stop was the hotel where we'd stay while gathering intel on the target. It was a modest, unassuming place tucked into a quieter part of the city. The kind of place you'd forget as soon as you left it. Perfect. Serafina and I settled into our room. A utilitarian space with 2 small beds and a single window overlooking an alley. We set up our gear, checked our weapons, and reviewed the mission details one last time. The target was a white rancor who controlled a local smuggling ring that dealt in illegal artifacts. Dangerous, well-connected, but ultimately a cog in a much larger machine. Our task was to remove that cog without anyone knowing Mythos Academy was involved. "Let's split up for now," Serafina suggested. "I'll scout the area around his headquarters. You handle the public spaces, markets, taverns, anywhere people talk." "Got it," I said, heading for the door. The mission was about to begin.